The silence of space stretched endlessly, a vast ocean of emptiness where even light seemed to fade into oblivion. Yet deep within the void, a faint signal began to pulse, breaking the stillness. It was a distress signal, reaching out from the dark corner of the galaxy, from a place humanity had never visited. Earth's deep space listening posts caught it first. It wasn't the usual chatter of passing spacecraft or satellite glitches. This was something different, something urgent. General Harris, commander of Earth's military operations, sat in the darkened command center, his eyes fixed on the screen before him. He'd seen distress signals before, so many over the years, but this one was different. There was something about it that made his gut tighten. The transmission came from a species known as the Ishari, a race humanity had only encountered briefly in the past. They were peaceful, mysterious beings, living in the outer reaches of the galaxy. Earth had no reason to be involved with them. At least, that was the belief before this message arrived. "General, we've decrypted the signal," one of the technicians said, her voice sharp, but edged with concern. She turned, her face pale in the soft blue glow of the monitors. "You need to hear this." The room fell silent as the recording began to play. The voice that filled the room was frantic, tinged with fear. "To all civilizations who can hear this message, please, we beg for your help. The Shalthor are coming. They have destroyed our worlds, and we have no means of defending ourselves. They will not stop until we are no more. We need your assistance, or we will all perish." The words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. The Ishari, a species that had once been peaceful, had now been pushed to the brink of extinction. The Shalthor, a race of ruthless conquerors, had already ravaged their homeworlds, leaving them with no hope for survival. The Ishari were offering the last remnants of their civilization as a plea for help, and yet the question lingered in the air. Why now? Why had they waited until their destruction was inevitable to send this distress signal? Harris leaned forward, his fingers tapping restlessly against the edge of the console. This wasn't just a simple plea for aid. There was something unsettling about the way the Ishari spoke, as if they were hiding something. The message was too clean, too precise. It didn't sound like a species in the midst of chaos. It sounded like a carefully crafted appeal. The Ishari had never been known to send out such urgent transmissions. They had always been secretive, methodical in their dealings. So why had they chosen this moment to reach out? "General, we've identified the location of the signal," another technician said, bringing up a holographic star map. "It's coming from the Ishari homeworld, but there's something off about the coordinates. It seems distorted." Harris stared at the map, his mind racing. A distortion in the coordinates. Was it possible that the Ishari were trying to hide something about their true location? Or was this a trick to mislead their enemies into thinking they were somewhere they weren't? The more he thought about it, the less certain he became. The Ishari were no fools. They wouldn't make such a glaring mistake. So what was the real purpose behind this message? "I want a full analysis of their star system," Harris ordered, his voice firm. "And get me Commander Lawson. She's going to need to see this." As the room buzzed with activity, Harris's mind wandered to the implications of this message. Earth had always prided itself on being a protector, on being the guardian of the galaxy. But now, faced with the destruction of another species, that sense of duty felt like a burden. The Ishari were requesting humanity's help, but at what cost? The Shalthor were a force to be reckoned with, and getting involved in their war could change the course of history. Could humanity afford to make an enemy of such a powerful race? The doors to the command center opened, and Commander Emily Lawson walked in, her expression serious as she stepped up to the console. She had seen the Ishari message herself, but Harris could tell by the look in her eyes that she was already thinking about the risks. She wasn't one to rush into action, but she also wasn't one to shy away from difficult decisions. "What's our move, General?" Emily asked, her voice steady, but with a trace of uncertainty. "We can't ignore this. If the Shelthor are as dangerous as they say, the Ishari aren't going to make it without help. But getting involved could put us right in the crossfire. Do we really want to open that door? Harris let out a long breath, his mind weighing the options. On the one hand, ignoring the message would be an act of cowardice. The Ishari had reached out, and if they were truly in danger, humanity couldn't just sit back and do nothing. But the other side of him, the side that had seen too many wars, too many lives lost, knew that rushing into this conflict could have dire consequences. "I'll need to think about this," Harris finally said. "But I'll be damned if we let them perish without at least offering a chance. We owe them that much." Emily nodded, but there was a shadow in her eyes. She knew the risks, too. The Shelthor weren't just another enemy. They were a force that had crushed every civilization in their path, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. And yet, humanity had survived for a reason. Perhaps it was time to show the galaxy just what Earth was capable of. As the distress signal continued to echo through the command center, Harris couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far greater and far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Whatever was coming next, humanity would have to be ready. But the question remained, was Earth prepared for what the Ishari were truly asking for? The answers lay ahead, hidden in the vast expanse of space, waiting to be discovered. But one thing was certain, the fate of more than just the Ishari now rested in humanity's hands. The decision to respond to the Ishari's desperate plea for help weighed heavily on General Harris. The planet's leaders had gathered in an emergency session, and the debate was fierce. On one side, those who saw a clear opportunity to advance humanity's position in the galaxy, to show strength and establish alliances with other species. On the other side, there were those who questioned the cost. Helping the Ishari might mean engaging in a war with the Shelthor, an enemy unlike any humanity had ever faced. While the world's politicians bickered over strategy and resources, the military continued its analysis. The unknown fleet, which had been detected on the outskirts of the Ishari system, was growing closer. Every scan showed a different image, a fleet that wasn't just an ordinary armada, but something far more advanced, with technology humanity couldn't even begin to understand. This, coupled with the distortion in the distress signal's coordinates, set off alarm bells in the minds of Earth's top scientists. Were the Ishari hiding something? Or were they simply desperate to survive? "I want full tactical support now," General Harris said sharply, looking at his staff, his voice cutting through the chaos of the room. "The Ishari may be on the edge of extinction, but we can't afford to blindly trust them. We need to prepare for the worst." Commander Lawson, now fully involved, stood up from her seat, analyzing the data in front of her. "Sir, there's something else we need to consider. The Shelthor have been wreaking havoc across several star systems. They have the technology to destroy entire civilizations, and from what I've seen, the Ishari are not prepared for that kind of power. If they've reached out to us now, they must be on the brink." Harris nodded grimly. "I know, but there's more to this than we're being told." The room went quiet as they processed his words. Harris wasn't sure how much of it was instinct and how much of it was the uncertainty gnawing at him, but he knew something wasn't right. The way the distress signal was constructed, the odd transmission pattern, the unknown fleet, it all felt like a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. Suddenly, the room's lights dimmed as a new message flashed onto the main screen. The source was not from the Ishari, but from the fleet they had detected earlier. It was a visual transmission, and what appeared on screen caused the blood in Harris's veins to freeze. There were no words, no formal communication, just an image. It was a fleet of ships, cloaked in darkness, surrounded by a deep, ominous energy. There was a heavy hum in the air as the image shifted, and what emerged from the shadows was a strange sight. A massive warship, completely alien, constructed with patterns and shapes that no human had ever seen before. Its design was both terrifying and beautiful, smooth, sleek, with black metallic surfaces that seemed to absorb light. And there was no mistaking the intent of the fleet. It wasn't here to negotiate. The message was simple, clear, and terrifying in its finality. It was not a message of alliance, but one of impending doom. Earth. The transmission began. We are the Shalfor. Your presence in the galaxy has been noted, your actions considered, and your fate sealed. The Shalfor had arrived. The room erupted in chaos as Harris stood frozen, his eyes locked on the screen. The message wasn't just a declaration of war. It was a statement that the Shalfor were now aware of humanity's existence and were actively making their move. There would be no turning back. General, we need to prepare. Now, Lawson urged, her voice urgent. The Shalfor won't wait for us to figure things out. If they found us, we need to act fast. Harris finally snapped out of his daze, his mind racing. They had no choice. The Shalfor's fleet was on a direct course for Earth, and if they didn't act quickly, humanity would be caught off guard. His mind flashed back to the message from the Isari. Had they been warning Earth all along? Or were they simply using humanity as a tool in their own fight for survival? Get me the fleet. Now, Harris ordered, his voice steady with determination. We don't have time for questions. Prepare for full combat readiness. With that, the military apparatus went into overdrive. Earth's space forces, while formidable, were far from ready for an enemy like the Shalfor. Their ships were equipped with advanced technology, yes, but nothing compared to the monstrous warships now bearing down on them. The Shalfor had weapons capable of obliterating entire planets, and humanity was still learning how to navigate the stars. Commander Lawson's team worked swiftly, coordinating with Earth's defense systems to form a unified front. But it was clear to all that no matter how much they prepared, the odds were against them. The Shalfor didn't play by the same rules. They didn't negotiate. They destroyed. Meanwhile, the Ishari's distress signal continued to pulse, and with it, the haunting question. Were they truly innocent in all of this? Was their plea for help genuine, or had they known all along that the Shalfor were on their way to Earth too? And more disturbingly, what was the connection between the Shalfor and the Ishari? Had humanity been pulled into a galactic war far bigger than anything they could have imagined? The distress signal had been received, but the true nightmare had only just begun. As Harris stared out of the observation window, watching the blackness of space stretch before him, the weight of the decision hung over him like an insurmountable storm cloud. Humanity had answered the call for help. Now they would have to fight, whether they were ready or not. The first shots were fired. And the sound of the explosions rattled the hull of every ship in Earth's fleet. It was as if the universe itself had decided to test humanity's resolve. The Shalfor had arrived with no mercy in their hearts, only the cold, calculating drive of conquest. Earth's defenses, though formidable, were immediately overwhelmed. The immense black warships, sleek and powerful, moved with precision and utter dominance. They were not just ships, they were weapons of destruction, engineered for one purpose only: to obliterate everything in their path. General Harris watched as the battle unfolded before him. His mind raced with disbelief as the first wave of Shalfor ships tore through Earth's defensive lines. The Earth fleet, despite its advanced technology, could barely put a dent in the enemy's armor. Each time a missile or energy blast struck a Shalfor vessel, it seemed to dissipate harmlessly, as though the very fabric of the ships was impervious to human weapons. It was a nightmare come to life. "We're losing them, General," Commander Lawson said, her voice filled with urgency. "Their shields are unlike anything we've ever seen before. We can't penetrate their defenses." Harris didn't need to hear more. He could see it for himself. The destruction was unfolding at a pace faster than he could process. The Shalfor weren't just attacking. They were dismantling Earth's forces with terrifying efficiency, one ship at a time. The few ships that remained in fighting shape struggled to stay in formation, dodging blast after blast from the Shalfor warships. But it was clear that they were hopelessly outmatched. "Divert all remaining ships to the defensive line. We need to buy some time," Harris barked. trying to keep control of the situation. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. The Shalthor were too strong, too relentless. He could feel the pressure mounting in his chest as the realization hit him. Humanity was fighting an enemy that couldn't be beaten with sheer firepower alone. They were going to need something more. The fleet's command room was filled with the sounds of alarms and panicked voices, but amidst the chaos, Harris's mind was clear. He couldn't waste time. He needed a plan. And he needed it fast. "Commander, what do we know about their weaknesses? Any weak points in their ships? Anything we can exploit?" Harris asked, gripping the edge of his console. Lawson glanced at the holographic map, her brow furrowed in thought. "We're working on it, but the initial scans show that their ships have a strange energy pattern. It's as if their technology is self-healing. They're regenerating from damage faster than we can inflict it. It's like we're fighting a living organism." "Damn it," Harris muttered under his breath. "We're not fighting a war anymore. We're fighting something alien, something beyond us." His eyes turned back to the screen, watching as Earth's last defenses crumbled. Ships were breaking apart, debris scattering into the darkness of space. It was a massacre. In that moment, an idea began to form in Harris's mind, born of desperation. If the Shalthor's ships were living technology, could they be hacked, manipulated, or disrupted in some way? If Earth couldn't defeat them with firepower alone, maybe they could fight back with something far more unconventional. "Get me the tech team," Harris ordered, turning to a nearby officer. "We need to get access to their systems, now." If these ships are self-healing, there has to be a way to interrupt that process, some kind of vulnerability. While the rest of the fleet fought to stay alive, the tech team worked in overdrive. Harris watched, unable to do anything but wait, as his officers scrambled to decipher the Shalthor's technology. Hours passed like minutes. The battle raged on, and with each passing second, Earth's chances grew slimmer. But then, at the very edge of his hope, a breakthrough occurred. "We've got it," one of the technicians said, his voice shaky but filled with excitement. "We've identified a system within their ships. It's a core neural network, like a central brain that governs their regeneration. If we can access it, we can disrupt the healing process. We just need a backdoor into their system." Harris's heart raced. This could be the break they needed. How long to implement? 15 minutes, the technician responded, sweat beading on his forehead. "Make it 10, Harris snapped, turning back to the screen, his eyes narrowing as he saw a Shalthor ship draw closer. The fleet was down to a handful of ships, and they were all on their last legs. Every second counted. As the technician worked feverishly, Harris turned to Commander Lawson. "If we can disrupt their regeneration, we might have a chance to destroy them. But it'll be close. We need to hold them off long enough to get this done." The fleet, though battered and broken, did its best to follow Harris's orders. They formed a protective line around the tech team's flagship, focusing all their firepower on the incoming Shalthor ships. Each blast they fired seemed to barely faze the enemy, but they kept fighting. In the depths of the chaos, a new kind of desperation took hold. This wasn't just about winning. It was about survival. The minutes felt like hours as Harris watched the battlefield unfold. His hands gripped the sides of his command chair as explosions rocked the ships around him. The Shalthor were relentless, but Earth's fleet refused to give in. It was a battle for the very soul of humanity, and with every shot fired, with every ship destroyed, it became clearer that this was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for humanity's place in the galaxy. And then, at last, the technician shouted, "We're in. We've gained access to their neural network." "Do it," Harris ordered without hesitation. Within moments, the battle took a dramatic turn. The Shalthor ships, which had been so invincible just moments before, began to slow. Their regenerative capabilities faltered, their self-healing processes grinding to a halt. The powerful warships that had once seemed unstoppable began to falter, their strength fading as the disruption took effect. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. Harris knew they had only moments to act before the Shelfer could adapt. He turned to Lawson, his voice filled with resolve. Prepare to launch everything we have left. All remaining firepower. We have one shot at this. With a single decisive command, humanity's last hope was launched into the void. It was a desperate gamble, but it was all they had left. The battle for Earth's survival was far from over, but in that moment, humanity had turned the tide. The moment the fleet's remaining firepower surged toward the Shelfer ships, Earth's last hope hung in the balance. General Harris stood rigid at the command center, his eyes locked onto the screens in front of him. The disarray of the battlefield was overwhelming. The Shelfer warships had been momentarily stunned, their defensive systems temporarily offline. It was humanity's chance to strike, but there was no certainty in it. There never had been. Launch all remaining warheads. Harris shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. His command was followed by the terrifying sound of missiles shooting into the dark expanse of space. Humanity's weapons, once the pride of their technological advances, now flew toward the enemy with the fragile hope that they would work. For a moment, the battlefield was silent, the blackness of space holding its breath. Then came the explosion. A massive blast lit up the sky as the warhead struck the Shelfer flagship. The shockwaves from the blast were so intense that they shook even the Earth fleet, sending ripples through the remaining ships. Harris watched in silence, his breath caught in his chest. The Shelfer flagship, that once invincible symbol of power, was now listing, its dark hull buckling under the force of the strike. But as the debris cleared, it became all too clear that the damage was not as catastrophic as they had hoped. The Shelfer ship was still intact. Only its surface had been damaged. The alien vessel, now showing signs of weakness, began to repair itself almost immediately. Its self-healing process was still active, working overtime to patch the damage. "Damn it," Harris muttered. The missile strike had done little more than scratch the surface. The Shelfer were too resilient. We need more firepower. But there was no time left to consider further options. The Shelfer, though staggered, were regrouping. Their vessels began to recalibrate their systems, and the terrifying hum of their weapons firing once again echoed through space. A wave of energy, intense and overwhelming, shot from the Shelfer ships toward the Earth fleet. The beams tore through space like lasers, their destructive power undeniable. They made contact with the Earth's remaining ships, disintegrating entire fleets with one blast. The surviving Earth vessels dodged as best they could, but they were hopelessly outmatched. "We can't take another hit like that," Commander Lawson shouted, her face tense with worry. "We're down to a handful of ships. We need reinforcements." But reinforcements weren't coming. The fleet had already committed everything to the fight. Earth's remaining ships, scattered and fragmented, formed a last-ditch line of defense, barely holding the line against the Shelfer's overwhelming firepower. Harris watched as one of the ships closest to the flagship was torn apart by a direct hit. The explosion lit up the darkness like a dying star, but the destruction only seemed to fuel the Shelfer. They moved forward with single-minded purpose, targeting Earth's last line of defense. The overwhelming might of their assault was suffocating, and even Harris, the battle-hardened general, couldn't help but feel a knot of fear in his stomach. "We need tow." Suddenly, the whole ship jolted. The impact was so intense, the force of it rattling everything in the command center. Sparks flew from broken wires as alarms blared in deafening shrieks. Harris was thrown to the floor, his head slamming against the metal surface. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, the world spinning around him. Then, in the chaos of the shattered command room, he saw Lawson's face. Her eyes were wide with disbelief as she looked at the holographic map. "General," she gasped, "it's them. The Izari fleet. They've arrived." A new fleet, far smaller but no less determined, appeared in the distance. It wasn't Earth's allies. It wasn't the reinforcements Harris had prayed for. No, It was the very same species that had sent the distress signal. The Izari ships, their sleek and organic design contrasting the mechanical coldness of the Shalfor, had come just in time. But what had caused them to show up now? The Izari had been running for their lives from the Shalfor for centuries, yet they had turned up at Earth's doorstep in the middle of the most crucial moment. Was it too little, too late? Harris shook off the disorientation from the blast and struggled to his feet. The Izari ships weren't huge, and they certainly weren't as advanced as the Shalfor, but they were not helpless. The alien ships fired their energy weapons, sending bolts of crackling energy into the heart of the Shalfor fleet. The impact was almost immediate. The Shalfor ships, already battered by humanity's assault, were now faced with the sudden, brutal firepower of the Izari. It wasn't enough to destroy the Shalfor ships, but it was enough to slow them down. "We need to work with them," Harris said, eyes locking with Lawson's. "They might be the only thing keeping us alive right now." Lawson nodded quickly, her fingers flying over the controls. "I'm opening communications with their lead ship." The room fell silent as Harris waited. His heart hammered in his chest, the desperation in the air palpable. The Shalfor were relentless. Earth's survival hung by a thread. And yet, despite everything, there was still a flicker of hope. The Izari were here. They weren't saviors, but they were allies, whether humanity liked it or not. "This is General Harris of Earth's military," he said, his voice steady. "We need your help. The Shalfor are too strong for us to face alone." A voice crackled through the comms, distant and distorted. The Izari commander's voice came through, carrying with it a note of urgency but also something else, something darker. "We will assist you, General," the voice said. "But understand this, the Shalfor will not stop until they have claimed this galaxy. We have seen their power before. We have failed in our attempts to fight them. If you want to survive, you must do more than fight. You must learn to outthink them." Harris's eyes narrowed as he processed the words. Earth had just entered a galactic war, a war that could reshape everything. With the Izari now standing beside them, there was a new alliance. But the enemy they faced was more dangerous than any Earth had ever encountered. And the true test was just beginning. The battle for survival was no longer just about defeating an enemy. It was about finding a way to outwit them. The battle raged on as the Izari fleet joined Earth's forces in a desperate attempt to hold back the relentless advance of the Shalfor. The once overwhelming force of the enemy seemed to falter slightly as the combined might of Earth's military and the Izari's unconventional tactics pushed back in the darkness of space. But despite this, the war was far from over. The Shalfor, though slowed by the unexpected interference, were still a devastating force. Their ships, though now showing signs of wear, continued to fight with unwavering precision, and their numbers seemed endless. General Harris stood at the command center, his eyes glued to the screens in front of him. He could feel the weight of every decision, every command that passed through his lips. Earth had been pushed to the brink of extinction, and now the Izari were their only chance at survival. Yet even with their combined firepower, it was unclear whether they could push the Shalfor back, let alone defeat them. As the minutes ticked by, the battlefield began to take shape. The Shalfor ships, though still formidable, were clearly struggling against the combined tactics of Earth's fleet and the Izari. The Izari had a unique form of warfare, using energy-based weapons that could disorient the Shalfor's neural network, slowing their reflexes and rendering their ships momentarily vulnerable. It wasn't enough to defeat them, but it was enough to give humanity a fighting chance. But Harris knew better than to get comfortable. The Shalfor were adaptable, and if they realized what was happening, they would change their approach. They would find a way to counter the Izari's interference. It was only a matter of time before the enemy would adapt, and when that happened, they would be ready for the next phase of the war. "General," Lawson called out from across the room. She was staring at her console, a look of disbelief on her face. "You need to see this." Harris walked over to Lawson's station and looked at the screen. What he saw made his blood run cold. The Shalfor flagship, the very heart of their invasion, had stopped regenerating. Instead of self-repairing, the ship's systems were flickering, as if something inside was interfering with the neural network that had once made their ships nearly indestructible. They found a way to block their own healing systems, Harris muttered. How did they? Before he could finish, a message came through the comms channel, crackling with static. It was the Izari commander. We've disrupted their regenerative process. We know how they heal now. We've inserted a virus into their systems. It will take time for the full effects to unfold, but their ships are no longer invulnerable. Harris's heart raced as he processed the information. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The Shalfor, for all their power, were not invincible after all. But there was no time to savor the victory. The Shalfor, though weakened, were still powerful. Their warships remained a significant threat, and they were not about to back down just because of one setback. We need to act now, Harris said, his voice sharp. Launch everything we've got at them. Give them no time to recover. The order was passed, and the fleet's remaining ships launched their final missiles, pouring every ounce of firepower they had left into the Shalfor's weakened flagship. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The Shalfor flagship remained stationary, its once mighty hull still intact, though clearly damaged. But then, something changed. The Shalfor flagship's engines roared to life, and the massive ship began to move, but it wasn't heading toward Earth's fleet. Instead, it turned toward the Izari ships, which had been the true disruptors of their self-healing system. The Shalfor had learned. They had adapted. They're going for the Izari, Lawson shouted, her eyes wide with fear. Harris felt his stomach drop. The Izari had been the key to their survival, and now the Shalfor were making their move. If the Shalfor destroyed the Izari fleet, they would be back to square one, fighting an enemy that seemed invincible. Divert all remaining forces to protect the Izari, Harris ordered. We cannot afford to lose them. It was a desperate move, but there was no choice. The Izari had shown humanity a way to defeat the Shalfor's seemingly indestructible technology. Without them, Earth had no chance. The battle took a dramatic turn as the Earth fleet and the Izari fought side by side, their combined forces targeting the Shalfor flagship. It was a desperate, chaotic struggle, with both sides pouring everything they had into the final confrontation. Energy blasts filled the space between the ships, creating a kaleidoscope of light and destruction. In the heat of the battle, Harris watched as the Izari flagship took a direct hit. The ship was engulfed in flames, but it didn't break. Somehow, the Izari kept fighting, pushing back against the Shalfor with everything they had left. Earth's fleet followed suit, coordinating their firepower to bring down the Shalfor flagship once and for all. It wasn't just the power of the weapons that mattered anymore. It was the resolve of the people who fought. Humanity, desperate and beaten down, had found allies in the most unlikely of places. Together, they formed a force that the Shalfor had never expected to face. The final blow came when the last remaining missile, a joint Earth-Izari weapon, struck the Shalfor flagship. The ship shuddered violently before it erupting in a massive explosion. It was a burst of light so bright it temporarily blinded Harris, but when it faded, the Shalfor flagship was no more. The battle was won. For now. As the remnants of the Shalfor fleet retreated into the void, humanity and the Izari stood victorious. Earth had survived, but at what cost? The war had only just begun. The galaxy would never be the same again. We did it, Lawson said, her voice almost a whisper. But we've just scratched the surface, General. There's more to come. Harris looked out into the void, his mind already racing ahead. This was a victory, yes, but it was one that would require 1,000 more. The Shalfor were only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and there were many more enemies out there. But for the first time, humanity had shown it could fight back, and they would continue to fight, no matter what the future held.